Are you thinking about building an ADU in California and want to understand the step-by-step process you need to go through to get the job done? Or do you want to know more about a $40,000 grant that California is offering to help pay for the cost of ADUs? Or how about having a community that's all about ADUs, so if you have questions about the process, you have somewhere to go to get those questions answered? Well, then this episode is for you. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Ryan from How to ADU, and we're going to be going over all this information and more. So if you're thinking about building an ADU in California, you're not going to want to miss this. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, everybody, I want to go ahead and welcome Ryan O'Connell to the show today from How to ADU. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. I've been following you for a while. I've been getting a lot of information about ADUs, almost all my information from you, because it seems like you're kind of on top of whatever is going on in California in terms of the laws, the programs out there. So thanks again for joining me.
It's my great pleasure. I'm glad somebody shares my obsession or benefits from it.
Exactly. So there's a couple things I want to go over today. The first, and I think the most important thing, is home prices are expensive. Interest rates have gone up significantly. So there's more and more homeowners now that are starting to say, hey, instead of purchasing another home, I've got family, maybe multi-generational. Either I'm younger and maybe my parents want to move in, or vice versa. I'm the parent, I have younger kids, and maybe I want them to take over the house and I can go live in the back house somewhere and save some costs, keep the family together, those type of things. So they're kind of starting to wonder, okay, is ADU right for me? And so how do I actually even get started in the process of seeing if I could put an ADU on my property and kind of what that looks like? So I just wanted to see if you can kind of walk us through some of your best practices that you've come across and all the time you've been doing with ADUs, and kind of what steps they might go through and resources they might want to look into to be able to figure out if it'd be right for them.
Yeah. You own a house in California, and the advice is very simple. To start off on figuring out what you can do, you want to figure out what jurisdiction you're in the planning department for your property, and just have a conversation with them, right? And almost everybody's got a take on ADUs. Most of the jurisdictions in Orange County are following state law and allowing them.
Yeah.
And then just before you go in for that conversation, you want to read the state guidance, the HCD, which is like our state's version of HUD. They've got a handbook about accessory dwelling units. It's free. And just skim it, right? Just kind of know your rights. And as long as what the city's saying is pretty in line with what the state's saying, then you're good to go. If there's anything that seems pretty out of whack, then you read that section a little more thoroughly. But that's a good way to like sandwich what you can do without picking a big fight, right?
And are you finding that when you're talking to the city planners, are they usually pretty knowledgeable what's going on? Now that I know like SB 9 is relatively new, so that's been kind of trying to get that implemented and making sure that the planning department's on top of it and knows the rules. Are you seeing that that's a little bit more fluid now and easier to kind of go through that process?
ADUs have been real firmed up, and they've gone through multiple rounds of cleanup bills. You go in with something like SB 9, and it's been law for almost a year now, but like there's a lot of kinks to work out.
Yes.
In general, what I'll say is people don't go into city planning unless they want to do good things, and so they'll be very open to it, and they'll try their best to figure out the laws if they don't know them already. And yeah, you're totally. It's a great time to be talking to city staff about accessory dwelling units.
Yeah. Okay. So basically first you go to the city, you figure out kind of what's the process involved, figure out who you need to talk to first. And they're going to be kind of the one guiding you through the whole startup process of going through that. Now, once you kind of figure out, okay, yes, I can put an ADU on my property. Next, I'm guessing you would probably want to hire engineer, general contractor, someone to kind of start the design process.
Yeah, I like doing the city and the HCD thing first because it's free, right? And it's kind of a good primer, or like you already pay your taxes, so the city kind of works for you, right? It's a good starting point. Like the most important thing is if you get a buddy at the planning department, like write their name down, and instead of going to the generic front desk, especially in larger cities or counties, get that individual who was like helpful. But then very quickly you start spending money. You talk about architects, engineers, builders, and what I would say is take a pause now that you know what you can do, and take a real moment to think about why you're doing it, right? And it sounds a little mushy and like touchy feeling, but it's super important to like. It's like when you're buying a house. Why are you buying a house? What are you looking for? And then you might say, well, let's kind of take a peek at this, and are we doing it for housing a relative? Are we doing it to save money on housing costs for that relative? Are we doing it because we're looking at rental return and it's a build and hold? Are we doing it because we're really thinking about selling the house within the next 10 years and we just see it as like a quicker flip, which is hard to do with an ADU?
Yeah.
So figuring out that why is gonna be very helpful, because you're gonna have 100 decisions over the course of this process.
Yeah.
So I would take a step back, think about why, and then once you know that, it kind of points you in certain directions. You might Architects are great. If you've got the budget for an architect who understands ADUs and understands customer service, that's a great hand holder through a project. If it's a smaller project and you're trying to keep things tight, sometimes a design builder is interesting, right? Somebody who the kind of contractor who doesn't mind doing permits, who likes drawing plan sets. Because ADUs are smaller, you don't necessarily need an architect. You got the GC, the engineers. So those are both good options. I'm available. I do consulting calls. I try to create as many free resources as possible so people can just see it on YouTube and like answer the common questions. If you run into challenges or you have a lot of good options, then it becomes interesting to call me and we can kind of work through the best ones. But most people should just be able to self-serve. That's the point of these new streamlined rules. That's the hope.
Yeah. Okay. So perfect. So get that done now. From your experience in talking to people that have been doing these, I mean, if someone was walking in, obviously there's 1,000 different options you can do in terms of building these. But let's say you're trying to build kind of just a base model, 800 square foot, 750. How expensive in general are you finding these things to be? Are you looking at like the 100,000, the 200,000? What kind of range pricing can most people expect for just a very basic model of this?
Yeah, this is a dangerous question.
Yeah. It's always a hard one to answer.
I'm not the one, even though I'm not the one who's going to build it at this price, I like to set people's expectations. This is a 6-figure project.
Yep.
Even down in most of you guys are in the OC, right? And like it's less expensive there for labor, but you're still, I would say you're gonna be happy if your project starts with a 2.
Gotcha.
And if you can get into the ones, you should be very happy.
Okay.
Things that can help with that are if it's a conversion of an existing space and it's an easy conversion, which isn't always a given. But like if it's got a slab with some footings and you can keep the walls, you can keep the roof, that every time you keep something, that's actualizing some saving. So having set that expectation, for all in, like it can be very expensive. Even just the permits, something goes wrong with utilities or an upgrade on the panel, and suddenly your costs go up by 15,000, and you're like, what? So that's why I like to set that expectation. Having said that, I have a Facebook group. It's free, called How to ADU, where there's homeowners in it. And they're talking about pricing all the time. I see people in SoCal finishing for 100,000, 150,000 on the regular. So completely possible, but I never want to set that as like the baseline. Because there's also people finishing at 300. So
exactly. Depending on the finishes and the complexity of the project and how many problems you run into, it's always going to be. And that's the same when I talk to contractors. It's the same thing. It's one will quote you this, and then one's going to be 50,000 more, then 100,000 more, and there's always going to be a range. So just want to see kind of the range that you were seeing on there.
One other thing is like, let's go back to that why. If somebody comes at me and they say, I'm building it for a family member who's like my adult child is moving back to California, they can't afford a place. They're going to sign a 1-year lease and pay $3,000 a month in rent. Okay. Do you save money and spend 4 extra months on your project and spend 12,000 in rent plus lock that kid into a 1-year lease? Or do you say, actually I should invest that in myself, and it's in the long run I save, or a variety of other outcomes. It's often like a time and money conversation, because you can finish these projects real cheap as an owner builder if you can invest 40 hours a week in the project, subbing it out and like vetting your own people, and you get a real low price tag, but like what costs sometimes. So it's
give and take. And so kind of the last question I have on that side of things is, From what you've been seeing in terms of like the timelines on these, is this something, if someone wants to do this, they can say, hey, I can get this done in a few months? Is this going to be with all the permits and stuff? Are we looking at like a year or more? What kind of the average timelines you're seeing with these ADUs from when they decide to start talking to the city planner to kind of going through and getting it fully constructed, ready to move in?
It's pretty typical to take a year. The moment you submit a permit, it starts a clock with the city planner, and it's supposed to be that they reply in 60 days. The laws are getting even tighter about that, but we're not seeing a lot of enforcement about that. And so I usually chalk in like, yeah, right. Like I chalk in 90 days for the city. And that includes like a round of comments where they can make some corrections. You have a week to fix them up and send it back in. So like 90 days for the plans, permits, and that's a good outcome. Sometimes it goes longer. And then it's pretty straightforward. There's not a ton to these. So the builders can get going pretty fast if you're a priority because you're paying the going rate. And if you're trying to skip, expect it to take a little longer. Maybe it goes up to that 9 to 12 months. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So that makes sense.
But it's a marathon.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's just like any kind of renovation project. It's almost tenfold because you're building an entire structure. So always things that can go wrong. Okay. So I mean, I think that gives people at least a basic understanding of some of the very general stuff. So you talk to the city first. And some of the cities I've seen too, especially with like SB9 stuff starting to come out, they have like plans that are already permitted and ready to go. So they say, hey, if you want this size, it's already ready to go. Here's the design. That's going to knock off some time, I'm assuming, in terms of, because everything's already ready, approved at that point.
Yeah. Some programs exist at local levels, and that's always amazing. They vary in how pre-approved they really are. But generally they do cut down the timeline. The most extreme example is in like San Jose up here. I've seen people go in and basically get it over the permit. They get over the counter. They get a permit within a week. And that's wild, right? That's really fun.
Yeah, very hard.
Don't know of anything that fast down south yet, but there's some jurisdictions doing a great job. And the other thing that to talk about in that vein is like there's state approved and federally approved housing, which isn't for every project, but if you're thinking about return on investment, a lot of the time, manufactured house, like what we used to call mobile homes, they can be a really interesting way to get this project done with minimal disruption on a budget. They affect the value of your property differently than something that's stick built, right? They'll be appraised differently sometimes. The lending options are different. And some, but you put it on a permanent foundation and it's a house. It's not like up on blocks or anything, right? So there's some really interesting options that are state approved and federally approved too. And there's Title 24 options that are state approved. A lot of prefab modular companies that are kind of doing similar things.
That was kind of my next question, because it seems to be, in terms of cost savings at least, a lot of money is flowing into those module type of homes and trying to get those companies off the ground. Like I think it's Boxable. That one is not in California yet, I believe, but they are trying to get in here. And there's a lot of other places that are trying to kind of pop up where it's basically you're folding the walls in, shipping it, and then a lot of it's already done. So you're basically taking a crane, putting it together, saving some costs on it, but it's going to be, this is what you get. You're not really able to alter it too much, except for maybe some of the finishes.
Yeah. So no comment on that specific company, because it's like it doesn't. I don't have a thing I can comment on in California yet.
Yes.
But modular companies in general, what I would do to set expectations is say the biggest savings is in disruption on site. So like all that construction happens somewhere else. That's guaranteed. You got somebody pouring a foundation, doing some site prep in your yard, and then the install day. The places where I would set expectations are, some of them are cheaper and some of them aren't. Some of them are a little faster, but some of them aren't. Like there's the same supply chain affects everything. So when costs go up on timber, it doesn't matter whether you're building it out of state or here or wherever, offsite, onsite. Lumber got expensive. And similarly, if your windows are delayed by 14 weeks, on-site construction or off-site, they're all buying the windows from like 3 or 4 manufacturers. So just be careful about that, because the one thing is guaranteed is less on-site disruption. So if you're living there or you got tenants you care about, Like that's a really good factor to consider. But for
Okay.
savings, careful. Anybody who says like, "Oh, I'll get you a whole house for like half the number that Ryan said was really good
Yeah.
at this,"
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Watch out for that.
figure
Okay.
out
Well,
that
that's
it's another great time to go to the planning department. You go,
okay.
hey, I'm going to get a permit. I want to figure out my permits with your unit. Can you send me the documents that I need to take to the building department and the planning department to get this unit installed? And the company will either be like, "Oh, we take care of that, and let's start the conversation. Send us the contact info," or they'll send you the docs. If they don't, if they're like, "Ooh, first put down 10 grand," you're like,
Gotcha.
"No
Yep.
thanks."
Yeah. Yeah. And move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's some great information, like I said, on the getting started process. So the second thing I wanted to bring up, because it's becoming more and more of a talking point, and it seems like California is obviously trying to really encourage people to build these ADUs, is this new ADU grant program, which I think there's $100 million in this program altogether. And it basically is allowing people that qualify to get up to $40,000 to be able to help with the costs or some cost of building these ADUs. Can you kind of speak to a little bit about what that program's about, and maybe some of the knowledge you have based on the conversations and what you've been finding out so far?
Yeah, with pleasure. So I'll start by saying this thing changes like every day. So,
That's what it seems. So I'm
we're talking on
seeing it on
November
on your
3rd.
YouTube channels and your everything like that. It seems like every time I see it, there's a change here, a change here.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
a very flowing process.
yeah. So hopefully we'll put a link in the description or something where you
Yeah,
can find the
absolutely.
most up-to-date information. It is a program being administered by Cal HFA, the state agency, right? And that's the best place to get authentic information, right? Cal HFA is allowed to give out this 100 million to homeowners who are increasing housing production by building an ADU or a JADU. And they've got some rules. So there's some income requirements. You can't be over a certain income level, but they're pretty generous.
Hmm.
I should have looked up the Orange County limit, but we'll
Yeah, I
put
think
it in the link.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, I think Orange County is like 235,000, I believe, is the limit on there
great.
for your income.
And the applicant just has to be somebody on the title, and at this time,
Yeah.
and then you show your first 2 pages, your 2021 tax return to validate that income that you stated. So there's a
Okay.
lot of situations where you could be eligible for the grant, even at moderate income or above. So then you get 40 grand toward pre-development costs, basically
Hmm.
soft costs. And
Hmm.
again, this is changing what gets included and what doesn't, but every project has 40 grand in soft costs, unfortunately.
Yep. Yep.
So you'll find a way to spend it. And that can include paying down points on the loan or other non-recurring closing costs. So
Okay.
there's a lot of ways to use that 40,000. I'm not meeting many people who had to give some of it back.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then there's a variety of entities that can qualify you for the loan.
Okay.
So even though Cal HFA holds the money, they're not gonna administer the entire thing. So they have a bunch of lenders, and you could go to those lenders, get a construction or renovation style loan that qualifies you for the grant. And Cal HFA likes that because they can put the money in this controlled escrow account that's related to the grant or the loan, and they know that it's going to be administered properly by that control. If you don't want to use one of those lenders, or you have cash in a mattress or whatever, there's some nonprofits and some cities and some different entities that can also work with you to qualify you for the grant, and they're listed separately on that website. The one that's 90+% of people have used is called HPP Cares, and you can work with any kind of lending or any kind of cash but you have to fund the account. So you're going to be like, oh, I did my math and my project's going to cost 150 grand, and they're going to say, okay, 40s or 33s coming from the state, and then you fill it with the remaining cash. And so you put your cash in this controlled fund. It's not in your bank account anymore. And so that's how the grant kind of works.
Okay. And so it sounds like you've been working with or talking to some people that have been using this. Does it seem like it's a pretty easy process? Is there a lot of red tape involved? It's kind of, like you said, it's
That's a
evolving. So it seems like there's always a little bit of slight changes here and
Yeah.
there. But how hard are these to get if you do qualify based on your income?
What I'll say is it's not easy. It's not like there's no strings attached, because you'll have to go through processes, right?
Hmm.
Whenever you get an invoice, if you want it paid directly from the escrow you've created, Now there's a process where before you could just write a check, now you got to send like to an invoicing department, and like that adds steps, and that can add time. Just to be realistic, right? Having said that, like I'll go pretty far out of my way for like a $5,000 grant. So if you tell me, 40,000, even with some fees, even if it comes down to a less, like a 30,000 or a 35,000, it's still a lot of money. So like I'm willing to put up with quite a bit of paperwork. That's kind of my view on that. But it is time. It does add time and process. And I've spoken to some homeowners who are in very specific situations, and you've got to talk to a financial advisor about your situation, right? Because it's taxable. The 40,000, you get a 1099 for it. B, I talked to somebody who was funding their ADU in cash, and it was a large project. It was a $300,000 project, and it's mostly from cash and a little bit from a HELOC. Their cash is in a 3% savings account, and the HELOC is at a 7% rate. And I'm like, you're gonna pull you're gonna stop getting 3% on that chunk. You're gonna start paying 7% interest on the whole HELOC, not just the amount you need at the beginning, because you're funding this account. Buddy, I'm not sure your CPA, I'm not your mom, but like go think about that math. Because that starts to get expensive to touch 35 or whatever that. So yeah, it depends. It depends.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, so I'll post that, the link in the description or comment section, depending on where you're watching this. So if you want to check it out, get more information about it, you can see that. But it's definitely a program that if you can take advantage of, which a lot of people do qualify for, definitely something to look in as part of the process of you going through and planning this. So with that last question on the grant, when in the process should they be going through and doing this? Should they be talking to the city planner and looking at that grant at the same time? Or when in the process do you think would be best for them to kind of start that process of applying for it?
This is going to depend a lot, right? So I'm a big believer in do little baby steps on planning, budget and finance all at the same time. Like find out what you qualify for, find out about what you could do, find out about what it costs. And you move everything forward a little bit at a time, because it's an iterative process. Development is like you're gonna backtrack, you're gonna step forward, and so start. But at the same time, there's a bit of a rush because the grant is finite. There's $100 million from the state, and like right now, some portals are opening and closing as they try to calibrate, because there's been such a surge for grant requests. So like keep an eye on it, but don't delay, because you want to educate yourself as quickly as possible. Now, having said that, the state of California loves distributing money effectively, right? That's one of the hardest things. So the fact that this grant is going very quickly, as long as it should result in the creation of a bunch of ADUs at the end of the year, the state's going to pat itself on the back, and it's going to free up more money. And maybe it's for this program, maybe it's for another one, but whatever exists in the future, the momentum is for more giving homeowners the ability to create their own housing, because it's been a really effective way to increase production in California. And that's what the state wants, so that's what it will fund.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that's a good starting point for people to understand about that process. So the last thing I wanted to discuss before I let you go today was the new community that you have basically come up with that you're starting. So can you kind of talk a little bit about that? So people that might be interested to learning more about ADUs, what is this community that you're developing? What is it used for? Who is kind of the ideal person for this? And just kind of let me know how people can effectively use this community.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've learned by working with hundreds of homeowners through this process is that it is a high friction process. It takes a year or more. Some people have been planning it for 2 years and saving up, and the laws change every year. A new batch of laws is going in place in January. And so I know a bunch of stuff, which I'm very grateful that this is my full-time job. I get to be obsessed with ADs and help people. But very quickly, you get 3 homeowners from a specific part of a specific part of California, and they know more about that one city than I do. They have the buddy at the planning department. And so I was like, I need to put a community together where people are actively building ADUs. You get access to each other. you're high achiever, you're gonna do this. And so that's a special community. You can, I'll put another link in the comments of the description, and that's a way to belong to a group of people who are actively pursuing their projects. The people it works for is either homeowners who are doing their one and they want to see other people go through the process, because there's a lot of hurry up and wait. Like you'll make all these big decisions, you'll put in your permit application, and then you'll sit around for 60 days.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it's great to actually spend that time seeing other people talk about their project and then go, oh, how would I act in that situation if that happened to me? And you'll be much more fluent when stuff happens. The other people it works for are kind of serial investors who are trying to stay on top of things, but they've got fingers in a lot of pies. There's quite a few of them in there too. And that's beneficial to the homeowners, because you get to look over and go like, oh man, that guy's on his 6th ADU, he knows what he's doing. And that's kind of how the group works. It's a monthly fee. Right now I'm doing first 14 days free, so it's a good way to test the water. Check it out, see the free resources that you get as soon as you enter the group. You get a lot of access to me and the group and the webinars at first anyway. It should be really fun. It's a good example of like all these new laws coming in January. It's not just that there's 12 changes that include 2-story ADUs and this and that. It's that those changes now have to be implemented at the local level. And so like we'll be learning and churning as we figure out how to actually, where the rubber hits the road. And that's what the group's for.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that sounds like a perfect marriage of the two things, where that's one of the biggest issues is like city by city. It's hard, even from what we discussed, just to figure out exactly the right process to go through, what is approved, what's not approved. So having those resources on the ground for individual counties, individual cities, sounds like kind of a no-brainer, and I'm surprised that no one's really created this community before. So thank you for creating that one, because it is a giant resource for people that are looking to try to get into this ADU, but maybe be a little apprehensive, because there is a lot of stuff to learn as you're going through the process. So to be able to use others as kind of your soundboard, as well as what mistakes did they make, how did they do it better, how did they go about it the most efficiently way possible, I think would be perfect for anybody trying to look to do this ADU and get one in their property, or even figure out if it's the right thing for them. They can go in there, browse, talk to people, and that might help them determine, kind of like we talked at the beginning of the conversation, what is your real goals? What do you really want to go through this ADU? Because it is a process, it takes a while, and it's really going to be worth it at the end for you. So that makes perfect sense. I will definitely put that in the link as well, so you guys can check that out, sign up for the free trial, see if it's right for you. And anytime you think about making an ADU, make sure that you reach out to Ryan. Ryan, what is the best way for people to follow you besides the community if they want to learn more about ADUs?
I try to put a lot of free resources out there. So YouTube, it's called How to ADU. TikTok, it's called How to ADU. I've got the website, How to ADU, and there's a free Facebook group too. It's got a lot more going on, right? There's 19,000 homeowners in there talking all day about different projects. But that's a wonderful resource, a great place to dip your toe in the water. And then if you ever want to be inner circle, then you know how to do it. But
gotcha.
I really appreciate this to talk about all of this with your, thanks, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and make sure I link all that stuff in the bio as well, so you guys can go ahead and check that out and check him out and follow him. Because if you want to know how to ADU in California, Ryan is a great resource to be able to go through and get the very basics to understand exactly what you're doing. So Ryan, thanks again for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I hope some of my viewers will be able to reach out to you and be able to get this process started so we can create more homes in California. So until next time, everybody, stay healthy, stay happy, and I will see you on next week's show. Bye, everyone.